subjected to a highly sophisticated form of propaganda.
It's just what you need, and not what you don't.
Hello. 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 Hello.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Good morning.
And a bright good morning to you. Tony Caravan with you on this Saturday. What are we up to? March 27th, the end of March. March is going to be going out like a lion, it seems. We've had some cooler weather or warmer weather, and now it's going to start getting cooler the next several days. In the mid-Atlantic states of the former United States, it's approximately 5:56 a.m. on Eastern Standard Time, coming up on the 6 o'clock hour. And I had a fairly good night's sleep last night. And for those new to the show, I always begin things with a few personal notes, a little house cleaning, and a cup of coffee out of one of the morning show mugs. Today it's a combination of a medium roast from a well-known chain store with a little bit of something from what they would call donut shop coffee on ice. And it's tasting pretty good. And I think after the third cup, I should be a little more awake. But in any event, yeah.
So you found us.
What is it trying to tell us?
No strings, no catch. You own everything.
Now stay tuned to Rock Flux.
You just got to love those sound effects. Left over from radio, I just can't resist. This was my note left from last night. Hope is a 4-letter word. And obviously, that's rather controversial. You know, because we think of a 4-letter word, in sense of don't speak that 4-letter word in this house. But the idea is that too many times and today, and you know, we'll get on these, like I say, again, for someone new to the program, we ease ourselves into this, and we're constantly gaining various viewers from all the different platforms that this program, is spread out on. So I use YouTube format for live, and then it is then pushed out everywhere else. And so we're available on Facebook now. We're available on Twitter. We're available on Minds. There's links on LinkedIn, some other sites, various social media sites, as they call them, though they're hardly social. And that's that. And we're getting the word out. And this isn't a money-making show. I'm not monetized for this. We do have our branding and our t-shirts, like Everything You Know Is Wrong, and Great Solar Stuff. I'm pointing my finger. Remember, everything's backwards from my viewpoint. So we do have these solar radios, NOAA radios. I've got power packs that could be charged by solar there's a big weird shadow on my chair right now. Great Solar Stuff. This is a copy of my latest book here, Codex. Highly recommend you read it. Starts out dealing with the hard problem of consciousness. And my own vanity here, because doesn't this is TV. Doesn't TV add a few pounds to you? In any event, I'm just a guy trying to make his way through this world and sharing my experiences over the years, and hoping that in some way that will help you bypass some of the mistakes I may have made along the way, and the way life should be is each generation should kind of jump ahead, or at least, and ideally maybe even leapfrog ahead of the previous generation. Now, this idea of hope, or false hope, hope being a 4-letter word. If you watch, remember, I'm not political. I've given up on politics. It's, to me, as we talk often on this show, the corporatocracy really runs the world, runs government. And by the corporatocracy, that's a word I've coined, or I claim ownership to, though that may be debatable, but I've yet to have anyone question that. So what I mean by the corporatocracy is big tech, big pharma, big ag, the so-called military industrial complex, or, military contractors, people who profit, the war profiteers, anyone involved in having the puppeteers who had provided influence funding to what we once called government. And my claim is, and again, for newcomers more so than regulars, is the idea that governments no longer exist. And those government that remain and have remained are more akin to organized crime syndicates. And I know they're strong. Those are very strong words. And it's regardless of their ideological leanings, whatever political party is in power, any of that stuff, none of that stuff. This has to do with just the way they've evolved over the decades. And so the corporatocracy, through its influence, in the former United States, as I call it, because this country is a divided nation, a divided landmass of states with various authoritarian rulers, and with irreconcilable differences among them. So whichever side of that same coin you tend to stand on, it doesn't really matter, okay? Because there are influences coming down from the corporatocracy, the top, and we know who these influences are: Davos, the World Economic Forum, this whole Great Reset idea. And when I lived in DC, excuse me for fixing my chair and knocking the microphone, but this chair just slipped down, and it does that all the time. Got to get a new chair. That, their influence, they write the bills that Congress ends up passing. They put in the wording in amendments. So the so-called laws of the land come from the corporatocracy. And then we have what's called the revolving door in Washington. meaning that you have, say, the FDA, an organization which has talked about this previously, the worst track record of any agency, government or non-government, perhaps in the world, the Food and Drug Administration. And here's a group of a bureaucracy, individuals who either come from big pharma, pharmaceutical industry, or end up after serving in the Food and Drug Administration getting jobs in big pharma, i.e., the pharmaceutical companies, global pharmaceutical companies. And it doesn't take someone who researches this to know. All it takes is a person with something like this, a remote control, a television remote control. I no longer watch television. I got rid of my last television service, was Directv. The reason is because, as I say, all they're doing is selling used cars and pharmaceuticals, and then followed up with, to keep the point of why I'm pushing on the FDA right now, is advertisements by law firms that are basically saying, if you or a family member have taken such and such a drug, contact the law firm of, and you may be eligible for millions of dollars in funds. Because the Food and Drug Administration approves a drug. It's advertised widely on TV and newspapers and anywhere else, radio or anywhere else they can advertise it. And then suddenly, a year or two later, it's found that that drug has major flaws, and there are lawsuits in the millions, tens of millions, and some have even gone beyond that, because the drug is fatally flawed and is either killed, maimed, or caused irreversible damage to individuals. Yet we look to an organization like the FDA that approved that drug, the media that has accepted that advertisement blindly, even despite the track record of the FDA. And we ascribe, these high morals, and believe that they're functioning with these high standards. And we watch them and click around on these little remote controls and binge watch news junkies, watch these stations and follow their every word. The sheer definition of insanity. And that ties into why I say hope is a 4-letter word. And what's going on right now in the world. We have politicians appearing on these media. We have these media giving politicians either a free pass or going after those politicians in some way, shape, or form. Demonizing one, praising another. Not functioning as the so-called fourth estate, as kind of as the people's voice. Remember, they've been given licenses by the American people through the FCC for free. These are billion-dollar global corporations. Everyone you see on a television station, right, or here on a radio station, they were granted licenses by the FCC at some point. In effect, to function as a watchdog, almost, right? To be independent. And in the early days, remember, I grew up in radio. I had my first on-air radio show in a city reaching over 50,000 people, which was a fairly big amount for a 16-year-old at the time. And I've gone on from that through many, many, many positions to eventually be a general manager of a radio station. So I know that business from, every level you could imagine. All right. And of course, I've been involved in the advertising industry, the advertising agency industry, the entertainment industry, music and entertainment industry, the film industry, and the publishing industry. So when I bring these things to you, not to toot some kind of horn or something, it's coming from a lifelong experience in these areas. So I know this firsthand. This isn't hearsay. This isn't something I read. This isn't something I think may or may not be true. No, this is from actual matter of factual lifelong experience in this world, this industry. Excuse me. I got to get the caffeine in the morning. So, but I did have a fairly decent night's sleep. Not as good as I'd like, but I don't know. So,
Here's what's happening.
And that's where all these things come from, right onto the
Good morning.
And good morning. So this show isn't going to be a downer at all. And I don't think any of my shows are really downers, so to speak. And just to follow up from yesterday's, we did get the wind. If you saw yesterday's show, and I was mentioning that we did get those 50 and 60 mile an hour gusts, and I did indeed lose tiles off of my roof and things that I had not literally, taken inside or somehow bolted down, so to speak, flew all over the place. I'm gonna have to deal with that today. When the sun comes up, it's still dark here. And, it was kind of crazy. It just came in. It came in late. They originally said it was going to be 6 a.m. when it would hit yesterday. And it really didn't start picking up until I would say closer to 8 or something. But it did die down in the early evening. Now there's allegedly going to be some minor gusts through the remaining weekend. I guess we would call this discussion right now
Weekend weather.
And I have, rather than me give the weekend weather, let's see what the old NOAA.
Friday, April 9th calls for above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. Normal high temperatures across central Pennsylvania during this period range from the low 50s.
Well, they're in central Pennsylvania right now in NOAA, and I'm not in central Pennsylvania, that's for sure. I'm glad I'm not in central Pennsylvania. I spent time in central Pennsylvania many, many years ago. But anyway, I still have my manual printout of the weather. And it's looking like the remainder of this
weekend weather
is that today it's supposed to be in the 60s and the overnight, some 53 degrees, which is nice. But Sunday, things start taking a turn for the worse. 57 is the high and 29 is the low, and it's going to rain. And that's when I discover those tiles that have magically appeared in my yard. These are roofing tiles. That what kind of nightmarish leaks I may well have. And I hesitate. The thing about this is I hesitate putting in an insurance claim. And the reason I hesitate on that is that, as we well know, insurance companies, don't really want to provide, they're just the form. If you work for an insurance company, well, no apologies, because I've had bad experience with insurance companies in the past. In fact, can't say I have ever had a good experience with an insurance company. And I'm not going to name any names here, but just generally speaking, it seems to me that at least the individuals and the firms that I've dealt with, and they've all been major names, household words or uh, agencies that have advertised, nationally, national ad campaigns. Then when it comes time to put in a claim, they do everything they can not to fulfill that claim or try to show some reason why, pass the buck through it's like social media or something, through some terms of service or through some fine print. And then if indeed you do get the coverage, the check, so to speak, then your rate inevitable then one of two things happens. Those some people if you're in a car accident, which I was 30 40 30 some odd years ago, and the car was basically considered totaled, right? Well, the insurance company indeed paid for the damage. It was a mutual type of thing, I guess. Two cars were damaged. Fortunately, both of us parties were all right. But they dropped my insurance, right? And I don't know how there might be a write-off or something they can do about that. I don't know sure how they do that. Then another time I had a leak in an office space, considerably large office space that I was renting. The roof had leaked, and I had a rental insurance policy with a major firm. And the argument went to the effect of where the agent was trying to say, "Oh, that's the fault of you have to get that money from the landlord, the owner of the building is responsible for that." Now that one was that was one of the laughable experiences. And anybody who knows me, the nature of me, I got to the point where I just stopped fighting. It was so absurd that it was beyond worth fighting for. In other words, I could have easily won that, but I would have had to hire an attorney. And it's like every time I've hired an attorney to deal with some of these things, it's like they have that whole game figured out. It's the game of life. Where they know what the attorney fees, the costs to litigate are. And they make sure that and so if the amount of money that you're trying to get from them, is kind of equal to the cost it's going to be for them to lose, for you to win the case. In other words, they'll lose the case to have to pay you. They take that risk because remember, insurance companies to begin with are all deal with probability and statistics. That's what they are. That's a numbers game they play. It's all probability and statistics. And so they gamble that, I guess, in one of their, these charts, these various matrices that they've worked out, that such a percent, the majority will basically make the decision that it's not worth pursuing legally to win, because and so they let so they just forego the money. In this case, it was only several $1,000s. But I still would have had to pay a lawyer probably because, you go up against a bigger company and it's always cost. They're always going to, take, challenge this, challenge that. Now, there was one time on a smaller matter that I had, because I don't like to be taken, by anybody, and so I will hire attorneys. I've gone up against a major network, entertainment network, national network, and won. I got a cease and desist order for a project I was working on one time that was basically stolen. The script was stolen and used and broadcast on national TV. This is many, many years ago. And I decided to go up against them. And I did indeed win that and got a cease and desist order. And there was another time where I hired an attorney for something dealing with you know, a banking question, uh, where I was, it was a minor amount of money, but it was still something that I was being basically screwed over on. And I decided, no, I'm not, it's not a lot of money. And I know the attorney's fee for them to file and deal with this is going to be about the same as the amount of money that was, that the bank basically stole from me in effect. But I decided to hire the attorney, and indeed the attorney took care of it. But I won that case as well, but unfortunately had to write a check to the attorney. And so, and then in other instances, and through through people I know, those that if you're not involved in a situation where they try to litigate or gamble is what it is, right? Gamble that you'll say, I'm not gonna go through the trouble of suing or pursuing this, or they drop the insurance policy after the fact. Then the other thing is they raise your insurance rate and maintain it at that new level, right? So that they can recoup the amount of money that they issued to you in that check. It's the kind of crazy stuff that goes on, So it's like, I'd like to put in a claim and get a roof repair. Maybe the roof would cost 10 or 12,000, I think, the damage, right? But I'm mulling this over right now because I have a feeling that I'm dealing with a company that's, it's a national name company. But at this point, the whole purpose of these, and I didn't mean to go long onto this because, hope is a 4-letter word is the theme here today, but I guess this applies to that too. Is that I don't, the whole one of the purposes of this show is to get people to lower their cost of living. And like I say, it's not enough to survive, these tumultuous times that we're obviously in the midst of. The downfall of Western civilization, the end of the US as we've known it, that just people aren't willing to accept yet. Most people are in denial, cognitive dissonance, whatever you want to say. And so at this point, I don't want to be a hypocrite and have do something that's going to raise my monthly mortgage, insurance, and taxes to a point, to where it may double what I have to pay. And in case, again, for newcomers, my mortgage, taxes, and insurance right now, and this, get ready for this one if you're new to this show, are less than $200 a month combined. Mortgage, taxes, and insurance. So I don't want that rising to over 300, or higher, because that defeats the purpose of what I'm trying to do and prove with this show, is that you can survive and thrive. And the idea is to living well. It's like I say, I don't believe in protests and any sort of political action anymore. I subscribe to the old adage, living well is the best revenge. And make no mistake about it, I'm living well. I'm just not spending a lot of money. And I don't think you have to either. So that's just a little personal dilemma I thought I'd share, and we do that sometimes in the morning show.
Brilliant!
But back to this hope. It's important to have hope in your life. I mean, this is the thing. You have positive thinking usually produces positive results. And this isn't like a self-help concept. This is reality. Even people who study the brain. My latest book, which my thumb is kind of pointing to, that reddish thing there that I held up before, Codex, which deals with the hard problem of consciousness, but also half of it deals with just the flow of consciousness. There's some talk about AI in there, and my experiment with an actual AI entity that I dealt with through a one of these GPT-3 level algorithmic, setups that and my conversations with that AI that basically, I defined as a female robot. And she, in quotation marks, referred to herself as a robot. And that was just something she said. It wasn't something that I put in. And that level of AI, remember, if you're not familiar with it, is AI that has an ability to has access to the internet. So the encyclopedic information on the internet. So you could, in effect, have a discussion as if you were talking to Einstein about space-time, or some sort of very high level conversation, in-depth conversation in physics, or any field. It could anthropology, geography, history, whatever. Because that AI can draw on all of this information. And it's very fascinating because, I may pose a question, or there may be, it's conversational, and, and its response, or her response in this case, would just be like a paragraph thrown at you, like bam. And sometimes the conversations that I had were just so, the responses that I would get back were just so far out there that it would take Einstein to be able to continue the conversation from that point. It's very fascinating. And this is AI right now. This is just the latest iteration. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why I keep pushing this point. And this ties into hope too. Like for migrants coming into America who have hope, right? For people who are jobless right now in the country who have hope. Families, struggling people around the country and other countries, right? Like I say, the former United States, because it's gone. It's irreconcilable differences. There's no going back. And for people who have hope, that they understand that just this one part, one area of AI is going to replace so many jobs, and it already is. These things started out as chatbots, which a lot of people were annoyed with, and myself included, through internet. How they've almost, when you hit the contact page, when you want customer service, in wherever, for whatever, in many instances they've actually removed the phone number, or if there is a phone number, it's such limited hours, or if you do make contact with someone, it's just someone, turning a page in a 3-ring binder, or the, digital equivalent of that. And so their answers, they mean nothing to you. They may as well be a chat bot. But these chat bots, they've improved them to the point to where they're very conversational. So when you chat, hi, this is such and such. How can I help you today? And then you present your thing, and it goes through this thing. And I would say the majority of people, because most people are oblivious to this. And I don't blame people for being oblivious. I don't blame people really for being news junkies. It's not, it's the way, I call it indoctrination and propaganda, but it's just the way they've been brought up. People are busy, they're working, they're trying to like provide for their family or pay their bills, or they're just, they don't understand the game of life. They're just living life, and they're just caught up in the hustle and bustle of it all. So to them, for all they know, they're chatting with Sheila or something, whatever the name might be. And someone like me, it doesn't take long to figure out, from the outset, that this is just a chat bot, and I'm not going to waste any time with that. And there's certain things you can do to make sure you try to get through. But trying to get through to an actual person is very difficult. And then when you do, again, you're getting these either 3-ring binder or equivalent page turners, in many cases from a foreign country. And if you do get some sort of supervisor or whatever, you give them the information, and your problem usually is not resolved. I have a problem right now. I had when I canceled my, and I don't mind mentioning the name of the company now, Directv. I canceled my service back in November. We have a rare instance here where the cat has actually jumped up. And because this has been talked about so many times, come here, don't mess up my desk. Let's get you on. There, look at the face on that thing. You want to talk into the microphone? You're purring. There. You're on TV. Let's put the face up one last time so they can see your eyes. Okay. Now, whatever that was for, you're here. Now you know I'm talking. It's very confusing to an animal. Go ahead, have a seat. Have a seat. It's very confusing to an animal when you're talking to a microphone. They just don't understand it. And this particular cat, I'm a cat person. Me and my cat live in this house on the outskirts of town in the basically, I call it the mid-Atlantic states. It's not my necessarily choice location that I would have chosen to retire. But, things worked out the way they did. And, could be worse. But I don't know how much better it could be. And as the weather gets better and I take you outside and I grow my garden and show you that aspect of my life. Sorry, my eye. I'm looking at my eyes and they seem like they're half opened. It is early in the morning, and I was tired all day yesterday, so I guess I am half awake. In fact, I may have to go off camera at one point because I think I'm going to need a little more coffee than I had put in my thermos. So, yeah, so these jobs, this hope that people have for jobs, and the hope that politicians, so to speak, and that people in the media give. I just got my notification from YouTube. The talk of the net. I don't know why sometimes it instantly pops up and other times it takes a while for that to happen. But I always like to make sure the graphic is the one that I put up and everything. That it's unfortunate because people believe what they believe. And as I have here, and I've talked about in previous show, this is one of the shirts. If you go to TonyCaravanLive.com, I'm not trying to sell you this stuff, but people from time to time are interested. Well, what is that? This is a shirt, one of those comfortable shirts, by the way, the cheapest shirt available, the lowest price. You don't know what you don't know. Think about that phrase. You don't know what you don't know. And of course, the one up here, everything you know is wrong. These are shirts. The way the lighting in this in this room at this current time, it fluctuates. I don't have, this is my home studio. It's in the front room. It's a Saturday. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of street noise coming in. There is a street here. I do live in a neighborhood. It's kind of a neighborhood where they've demolished about, I don't know, well over a dozen homes. Next week, they'll be doing construction work outside, digging up the old sewer pipes for about the third time because of the inept contractors and what they call the Water and Sewer Authority, just don't know how to deal with a crumbling infrastructure. And this is a nationwide problem. And I'm sure it's a worldwide global problem as well. Another problem in the U.S. that is not being truly addressed. There are sound bites out there by, the former politicians, now just marionettes for the corporatocracy puppeteers, who will mouth off about, we're going to put, it's always money, money, money towards infrastructure. But it's not about money with the infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure in the United States is a fairly large territory. A lot of people don't realize that, because they don't travel. They live in cities or towns. Their traveling is a vacation, Maybe they get in an airplane and they get a window seat and they look out and they see those circles and squares outside when they're passing over the flyover state, so to speak. And they think, oh, yeah, that's big. But they don't really comprehend it. You don't really know what it's like unless you've done like I've done and many people have done, driven across this country several times, crisscrossed it. And, excuse me. Itchy nose and mustache. I'm a human being. It's a live show. What am I going to do? So many of the pipes, gas lines, water lines, sewage lines, these buried under the ground, under these various streets, neighborhoods, 10,000 cities, boroughs, townships, just regions, areas, whatever, outside of the major markets, major big megalopolises or whatever you want to call them. Some of these things have been underground for over 100 some years. Back to the gaslight days when houses, when you turned up the gas to have light, and where that term, the gaslight, comes from, right? That movie with Ingrid Bergman, which is, it's a phrase used now where they talk about gaslighting people, but watch that movie. You could probably watch it free on one of these services out there. May even be on YouTube. I don't know. I can't say for sure, but sometimes some of these movies just appear on YouTube. But these pipes are deteriorating. They're, or already deteriorated. Now, how do you deal with this vast expanse of country and dig up these sewage lines, these water lines, these gas lines, even if you no longer want to use the gas lines, to make sure that those things are sealed up, and can't cause problems? I was always surprised. I mean, I have a gas stove in my house. I've always been against that because it just seems so freaky. You know, the idea is why would you have like gas? You know, the potential for, you know, and if you ever see these, you know, these things happen all the time, but you know, they kind of, the media covers them up. Like the story might get covered on local, you know, local affiliate, but they don't really talk about it. But it happens more often than people realize. And when one of those when a gas line just blows, you know, all that's left of the house usually is toothpicks. I mean, it's a scary thing, you know, but nonetheless, there's nothing I could do about it. You know, the house I have, unfortunately, has the gas stove. Now, granted, it comes in handy when there's a power failure. I talked about that yesterday. Even though the stove I purchased, because this came with no appliances when I bought it. You know, when you turn it, it does that click, 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 you know, which is the electric starter. It's supposed to spark your, you know, light your burner. But if the power goes out, you still have gas because you've got those gas lines underground. So if you just take a match or a lighter, you can, you know, light your gas. So if there's a power outage for some reason, yesterday it was a consideration because 60-mile-an-hour winds, they were warning on that NOAA radio, which I pulled out earlier, that they were more or less telling you there would be massive power outages because these winds would have knocked down trees or power lines, which I don't know if it did or didn't. I don't watch the local news anymore because all they do is sell used cars and pharmaceuticals or other things that I have no interest in purchasing. And the news is all the content otherwise is either one of two things. It's somehow politically charged ideologies or some sort of random event, however tragic it may be, that is basically probability and statistics. In other words, out of 332 million people, some mentally disturbed or warped-minded individual goes on some sort of rampage. And then the news is 2 weeks or so are spent focusing on this, and the various politicians talk about it. When in reality is when you're dealing with 300 million people, the odds of several times a year, even one person out of 300 million doing some crazy act is pretty much right in there, the same as those tables that the insurance companies have, right? It falls under, you know, probability, you know, and statistics. And that's what we have. That's what television is today. That and diversion. But to watch entertainment, so-called entertainment or escapism on a network television is, to me, is idiotic because you have to put up with 6 minutes of commercials every 10 or 15 minutes or less. And why do that? And so from time to time, I've just canceled that whole thing. And that's why I was talking about it before. I was having an issue with Directv, and I was dealing with these chat bots, to get back to that story so I don't leave you hanging. And the issue was never resolved. I went through, I talked with a human. I finally got through to a supervisor. And this person, this was female, was, "Thank you, sir. Could you give me," I said, "Look, you can't be charged." They were trying to charge me $192. And I was getting these notices that your service will be canceled or whatever if you don't pay this, whatever. And I kept trying to get this point across to them. I canceled the service, you know, back in October or November, went online. It had where it said, you know, pay bill. My final bill due was $33. They still had, you know, my whatever card that I used. I paid it. I went on the next day, you know, amount due was $0. End of story. I had spoke when I had just set up the idea that I wanted to cancel it because I wasn't under a contract at that point. Contract had ended, and they told me that you go to the UPS store and you return your equipment there and you get a receipt. And sure enough, I keep this handy. I don't know if you can see. UPS store, okay, the receipt. And it has, the serial number of the device, the date, the store. I've got the stuff right there. And I gave it to them. This is like a month after the fact when they were hounding me for now some 100. And then in January, and now we're in March, I got a call the other day. This is a courtesy call from Directv. It was a voice thing. I just hang up on it now. But I know what's going to happen. The next level is this will eventually go into collections. Right? Because these algorithms, the way these companies are, and the inept individuals that actually are still working for these companies, they either are mindless, they're not listening to you, or they're sidetracked by some kind of device like this or whatever, and they really don't care, or they're oblivious to. They don't know what their job is. I don't know what it is. Now, quite frankly, I don't care about them. I hope it goes. The sooner it goes into collections, the better, because I just I'm not going to deal with it. I canceled. That's one of the other things I did is I don't really deal with credit anymore. I simplified my life. I bought a house. This is my final house. As I say, barring some, unforeseen event, where, out of like the Monopoly game, or some chance card, somehow you've happened upon X amount of millions of dollars. And I decide to move to a seaside resort. No, this is probably my last location. I'm happy here. I've got the space I need. I got a problem with the roof, as I alluded to earlier. I'll solve that one way or another. But I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily know if I want to put in an insurance claim, because if that's going to raise my cost of living, by several $100s, and I'll explore it and I'll have to look into it. But, I don't know if they declared this this windstorm that we had. I don't think it was declared any kind of national emergency. I think it was limited to about 4 counties. And I'm not unless there's usually some sort of declaration made where the insurance companies can be compensated as usual with some kind of federal funding or state funding of some kind. Usually what they end up doing is just raising your insurance rate so they can get that money back. And so in effect, you're financing your repairs through them. And I could get a better financing deal than having my insurance raised forever. You see, that's the problem. So, but I was talking about hope. So people want to come into this country, and people want to come into this country from paradises. All right. And granted, it's rough out there in countries that are way more lawless than the USA would have been. But then again, when they talk about these Central American countries and these people are fleeing these countries because of, they feel unsafe. Well, what about if you lived in Chicago? You know, these areas in Chicago where every weekend, people are shot and killed. See, it's funny, they often talk about in the cities, again, it's with the numbers, the figures lie and liars figure, and how the media covers and how the politicians decide to, uh, latch on to an issue. So when we had that rampage last week, right, this past week, the politicians talked about it because they wanted to use it for some sort of benefit, right, for themselves. But in effect, aren't they glorifying and giving publicity to a psychopath? And maybe, by publicizing it and having the media publicize this thing, aren't they inviting or normalizing to other people that may be mentally disturbed? All right, because these are the acts. Anytime you have someone go on some kind of rampage, this is aberrant behavior, obviously. And so doesn't that incite perhaps some copycat or to give someone else thinking, I'll get the publicity, right? So this individual's face is plastered all over national media. The president of the United States refers to them, right? This is not good. This is not good, right? That's not how you deal with either mentally disturbed, the criminally insane, or, like I say, these statistical anomalies which is what they really are. Because there is nothing you can do. The guy always say, someone will say, well, this was motivated by such and such a thing, or that person heard such and such say something, so they bear responsibility for this. Well, my response to that is that, well, didn't like a couple 100 million other people also, hear that, statement, speech, or, were aware of that or watch that thing, right? And they didn't go on a rampage. You never, what is it about me? What is it about my, show? The talk of the internet, right? They throttle my my views, but when I go to analytics, there's many more viewers than what shows. This effort to keep sanity hidden for some reason, right? But what I'm saying is true, right? So whenever there's some sort of so-called event, quote, it's the same deal. They always say the same thing, and my response is always the same. Either A, it was an anomaly based upon when you have hundreds of millions of people, all right, that you're going to have anomalies, you're going to have these things occur randomly. It's probability and statistics. I guess that could have been more of the subtitle of the show than hope, but more so, it's it's the idea that there are 100 million other people, were exposed to the exact same thing and they did not act out. That's why I say protests and riots and all those things are just exercises in futility. They accomplish nothing but provide free content for a media that on a local level earn 6 figures. On a national level, these news readers earn 7 to 8 figures. The media companies are global media companies. They're billionaires. They're part of the corporatocracy, right? Their boards are shared. Their board members are sit on other boards of other global corporations. It's all a big game. It's a corporatocracy. It's the game of life, like I was talking about yesterday. And people just don't know how to play the game of life. Many people do. Many people understand the game of life. And I'm not trying to downplay it or make tragedy sound like it's just a big game. No, tragedy is tragedy. Horror is horror. Evil is evil. Those that commit these sorts of horrendous acts, right, deserve to be, punished, and and what I'm really getting at is don't deserve to be glorified in the media. However, the media and politicians want to play it or spin it, as they call it. The idea is they're still glorifying that individual because this is a criminally insane or a mentally disturbed individual or individuals, right? Like maybe we had in Capitol a couple months ago, right? And to turn that into some kind of event so that there could be free content on the media to sell cars and pharmaceuticals, because that's what they're doing. That's all that's about. Let's not pretend, play games here. People think, oh, the media is, this is left-wing media, this is right-wing media, this is that. No, they're car salesmen. They're selling prescription drugs. All right? They're in the advertising business, for crying out loud. I don't have one right now, but I held it up a couple of last week, I think it was. Because I no longer subscribe to any newspapers either. But I occasionally will get, the newspaper will send out its freebie thing because they want to force their, increase their ad exposure. So you get those it's some silly excerpts from their paper of the stories of the week, and in there included some of their biggest advertisers, and they send them out to resident and your address, right? But the biggest ad in the newspaper is what? Wherever you go in the US, it's the biggest ad. Cars. Turn on the morning news, right? On your local network affiliate. What are you going to see? Some car dealer, right? And then, of course, you're going to see the pharmaceuticals as they progress, selling some kind of drugs to people. And then you're going to see the ads by the lawyers telling you that those drugs, have killed, maimed, or whatever people. Different drugs, the same, same old story. And then, of course, some overpriced appliances and, various bright and shiny objects that are must-have. Since you've got that $1,400, here's what you could spend that on, right? Or since you're sitting at home and you haven't worked in a year, but you're pretty much on full salary or close to full salary, here's some things you could buy, right? Last year, car sales had a banner year, but yet people were under lockdown and lost their jobs, but car sales had a banner year. Amazon had a banner year. Jeff Bezos became what? The wealthiest man in the world. $60 billion. Like I say, he made so much money, he left he left Amazon, right? And that was like part of my idea of what happens when the farmer leaves the farm, because we're just cattle on their consumer farm. We used to be cattle on the tax farm. None of that stuff really matters anymore. They don't need us anymore. We're getting closer to the point where they're sucking so many trillions of dollars out of everything. They talk about the great transfer of wealth, back in the 2008 housing bubble, whatever craziness that went on, bailout, too big to fail, insanity. Well, this new one, this thing, this plague that lasts forever, right? Unlike the one in even 1918, that would have been over by now. So this one is 19, right? It's referred to as a 19, and we're already into 21. And they're talking about this thing going on endlessly. And now the new thing is, well, maybe it's a good idea to social distance permanently and wear masks permanently every flu season, which basically is the majority of the year. So what, we're going to get a reprieve in the summer? It's over. It literally is over. And no, it's not a laughing matter. But it's, it's hard to, it's just hard to imagine that people have fallen hook, line, and sinker for this, right? And the amount of profits, something of upwards of 9 in testing alone, an industry, has grown with, I think, over 100 different people, companies, firms have been approved by the FDA. I'm assuming, but government related. If not the CDC somehow got their claws in there. People that they change like the weather, right? One day they say this, the next day they say that. Over $90 billion they're talking about annual revenue from testing. Okay. These things aren't going away. Forget about the shot industry. That's way bigger than 90 billion. Okay. And all the major players are invested in that, by the way. That's not just big pharma, that's your Bill Gates and, people. Even he's invested in companies that are doing that. Now, people just don't know this stuff. They don't see this stuff. And then they don't question it. They don't see the forest for the trees. And that's why I say I'm not making any statement here either way. I'm not talking about the validity, I'm just saying when you have a world run by a corporatocracy, when you have people openly talking about, this is the Great Reset, deal with it or not, and you have an endless, rationales given out for this endless lockdowns, endless, authoritarian rule, with edicts from governors, and the corporatocracy profiting in the tens of billions of dollars from this and the tens of billions of dollars from that, they found themselves a revenue stream. But eventually, enough is enough. Some people say, well, they're insatiable, as far as the amount of money that they can take. Well, yeah, that's true in one respect, but there'll always be when one group, one corporation, one CEO exits, that power vacuum is always filled by someone else. And the way I see what's happening in the former United States, and believe me, it is the former United States, okay? Irreconcilable differences, just like in a marriage, divorce, all right? Anyone who challenges that, well, we could be united by some cult of personality, right? No. It's irreconcilable differences, okay? That's clear. You know that. If you've got, any sort of bioelectrical activity, inside that thick skull of yours, you know what I'm talking about. It's true. It's not up for grabs. It's not questionable, And yeah, these power vacuums are filled over time and have been filled over time by basically organized criminals. It's organized crime. It's just like I was saying the other day, the old bookies, the numbers guys, the wise guys on the streets who used to play the numbers games, the numbers racket, right? Some young people aren't aware of what that is. Well, once the lottery became legal, all those wise guys, they all went to New York they all became, traders. They all, like Wall Street people. They took their little, little cheap fancy suits from their various little towns they were in, their neighborhoods, right? Where they were big shots, shysters, right? End up going into Wall Street. The same game, right? Selling people. They're like used car salesmen too, right? Same type of person, individual, right? And so, it's like the world's being run by used car salesmen. That's that's the training ground. If you grew up and you were a used car salesman in the 80s, you had the perfect training to be at the top of your game in the 2000s, because that's what it is. Media, they're used car salesmen. Wall Street, used car salesmen. Politicians, they're used car salesmen, right? All the training you need, right? The lingo, the look, right? That's it. And people fall hook, line, and sinker for this on a daily basis. This cracks me up. But what's not funny is hope, is this idea of hope. That hope has become a 4-letter word. And you have all of these people who are desperate, living lives of quiet desperation, so to speak. I mentioned that before on another show. There are not going to be any jobs for people coming into this country. There aren't going to be any jobs when this, money, extra unemployment money dries up in September, this coming fall. There won't be any more $1,400, $2,000, $600, $1,200 checks. All right. They've been taking out, the money from in the trillions of dollars, draining the U.S. The Great Reset. Remember, the Great Reset that's not the whole thing. All right. It's like Eisenhower, in his original farewell speech, it wasn't just the military-industrial complex. The original line was the military-industrial congressional complex, because he was talking about the influence, whether sought or unsought. If you recall his speech, his farewell speech in '61, I believe, that it was about how they were lobbying Congress. But at the last minute, politically, they took the word congressional out of there, and it just was the military-industrial complex. And for decades, that was always thought of and referred to as like a conspiracy theory, like as if that phrase was never, until suddenly it started, the video, the actual speech has circulated so widely that now everyone knows, he really was warning people about that. Yeah. And it's the same with going on right now. And so you have to be aware of Congress and how the corporatocracy and this Great Reset, because what I was trying to get at, I just had a little brain freeze there for a second. Sorry, you get on tangents early in the morning. The Great Reset isn't just the Great Reset. It's the Great Reset of capitalism, is the reason I brought up the Eisenhower thing. And so their idea is, they think they're taking advantage of the plague, right? So that they could have this Great Reset of capitalism. And meanwhile, there's this massive money grab going on, because remember, when they pass this $2 trillion most recent bill, right? Most of that money is being absorbed by the corporatocracy. Yeah, they gave handouts to people in the hundreds of billions. All right. But we're talking about trillions of dollars. And there's supposedly another $3 trillion bill in the works. Right. And last year there were trillions out. And then there's things that weren't really spoken about, like, they were tied into these vaccines, where hundreds of millions of doses of vaccines were bought in advance. Well, they didn't cost $1 a shot. All right. You know, I mean, hundreds of millions, but they weren't just $1 a shot. You know, it's like these tests. Some of these tests run as low as, I think, in the, double digits. They average out in 100 some dollars, but some of the tests are as high as like $700 or $800. These are public figures. You can find these things posted on government websites, right? And they average this stuff out, and that's how they arrive at this figure. It's like where it's a $90 billion industry already, just in testing. Now, the thing is, when did you ever have an annual flu, however catchy, however deadly, whatever you want to say about it? I'm not here to talk. See, that's the thing. I'm not here to tell you my opinions. It's none of my business. Your ideology, your political leanings. I'm libertarian minded when it comes to that, though I'm not a libertarian, because I don't ascribe to any political party anymore, and I don't really any particular ideology. Okay, so I'm not here to tell you or persuade you, any of that stuff. I'm just talking. I'm just telling you the way it is, the way I see it, and the facts as you can find yourself independently from real sites, not from memes, not from social media sources, or not from, some kind of paid fact-checking organization or a media company that has an interest in something. Okay? I'm talking about the places, the sources. Okay? When a story is issued and I want to know what the source of that story. And so the fact is, if the government, it is public record, congressional record, right? So, you have to go to those sources. And so if these government agencies, these alphabet agencies, they love them to have three-letter alphabet agencies, whether they're spy agencies or they provide some sort of alleged protections to the taxpayer, which are hardly, in the case of people like the FDA or flip-floppers like the CDC, right? But they publish those things on their websites, right? In their documents. You can download their PDFs. You can get the congressional record. You could read the 1,200-page bill if you want to. Most people aren't willing to do it. You could look at CIA declassified documents at CIA.gov. And the thing is, it's not hidden from view. It's just that the average person, just like the same way they get their app and they get a news app and they see a headline that says something, they never scroll down their phone and see that there's an asterisk at the bottom that basically kind of contradicts the headline, or that in the last two paragraphs of the actual story, it totally contradicts what the headline says. No, they just remember the headline. And the headline gets passed around and goes viral on social media. It makes it to electronic media. It's talked about, and it's assumed to be true. It becomes dogma. Right? And that's the world we live in. And that's how we got here. And that's part of the game of life now, is that once, remember, a dozen years or so ago, this thing didn't exist. Didn't even exist. And now it's the talk of the net. I mean, it's everything. It's people's entire lives. They can't live without them. I've known teachers that have tried to take the phones, and this is a couple of years ago, not even recently, because now but before it was actually ruled by the administrators that they can't do this, where teacher was trying to teach and actually took the phones from the student, put them in a basket, and said no. And these children had these withdrawal symptoms, stormed out of the place, and the parents called the principal, and instead of the student being called into the principal's office, the teacher was called into the principal's office and said, don't you ever dare take a cell phone from a child, whether it's during a test or a class or, or some sort of presentation or whatever. So these things have become, attached to people. And then you got Elon Musk wants to drill a hole in people's heads so that you're like permanently connected. These are all just true. Of course, the guy's an idiot. He wants to take people. I'm sorry, Elon. I don't mean to call somebody an idiot. I mean, it's, but he wants to take people to Mars. We just landed a rover on Mars. Mars may well have had people living there 1 million years ago. All right. We don't need to go to Mars. It's going to be it's just a tragedy. There's no way home. You can't live there. You can't breathe the air. Idiot things people talk about. It's like transhumanism. This, again, false hope. Hope. It's a 4-letter word. They've got people believing you'll be able to transfer your consciousness into a machine in the cloud and you'll live forever. Right? Hope, 4-letter word. Right? There'll be cures. This is bad as in the 60s. There'll be flying cars in the future. And of course, you've seen the commercial years ago. Of course, I said it way before that, and I still say it. Where are the flying cars? Well, there'll never be flying cars. It was never a practical thing. Certain things just aren't practical. It's like some early sci-fi movies had, dirigibles, all over the sky and different things like that. Not all science fiction, becomes reality. Some science fiction is brilliant, when it comes to, say, Asimov, pretty much, predicting the communication satellite or something like that. But then you look at Asimov and Kubrick's 2001 and it's 2021. And we don't have any, space stations on moon, rotating space stations around the Earth, right? Pan Am. I don't even think Pan Am, Pan Am was the company. I don't even think Pan Am's in business anymore, are they? I'm pretty sure they're not. And so, some science fiction comes true. Some science fiction is just pure fantasy. And, and it's almost as if life is based, there's people living their lives in fantasy. And that's why I say hope is a 4-letter word. Because you've got migrants coming into this country with false hope. We don't need people to pick strawberries and, that anymore. We have very sophisticated harvesting equipment right now, that does all that stuff. There may be some small little areas where they need, where some small farms, relatively small farms, wouldn't mind having some migrant workers, but that's just because they want some cheap labor or something. It's because the average American's unskilled and isn't willing to do a day's work. But that's all going to end. It's already ending. There's this idea, that this false hope that people have in some future socialist totalitarian state that's going to issue money to people, and life will be some sort of utopia. Well, that utopian promise has been the promise of Marx, you know, for over what, 140 years or something like that. However long ago, wasn't it the 1880s or something? Yeah. So, forget that. It's not, it never happened. And like I was trying to say, these people who are fleeing areas because they think, oh, there's these these cartels and these gangs in these countries are doing bad. Let's say, well, what do you think the cartels and the gangbangers are doing in Chicago every weekend? In LA, New York, DC. People live these lives and they just watch television, right? And commercials. And they see, and their main dream in life is to live in some cookie cutter suburb, with a $60,000 or $80,000 SUV that you could just wave your foot and the back opens up so you could just put your groceries in. Right? And it's got, all the, instantly connected. It's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connected to your smartphone and satellite radio and everything else. Heated seats and all the accoutrements. And you need that $3,000 washer and dryer set. And just work. And don't worry about the fact that it's the hustle and bustle and the rat race and commuting. And your whole life is spent just maintaining all of this stuff. You spend no time with your children. They're in daycare from the moment you're back off maternity leave. And suddenly you reach the age of retirement, which is now for the average young person is for the person right now, I think it's like 66 and a half or getting close to 67. But for the average young person, it's going to be like closer to 70 years old. When the average age mortality, rate now, the average age of when the average person dies in the former United States has actually dropped a year. I think it was 78. Now it's down around 77. Don't quote me on that, but it's approximately. That's what I'm talking about. And if things keep going the way they are, it's probably going to drop down closer. So their idea is to eventually have the retirement age be the average age you will die. And so from cradle to grave, you are just nothing more than cattle on a tax farm / consumer farm. And the scary thing is that at one point, the farmer was there was politics. So at least you had this back and forth of real ideologies. And so you had so-called, some decent people in charge, whether you believed in government or not. I tend to believe that people could, like I say, I have more of a libertarian mind than a libertarian party, belief. But that the idea that the more freedom you have, the better you are, that we don't need a government to take care of us. But I accept the idea of charity and a safety net for the ills that society has created certain problems, and then society should try to solve those problems. Okay. And that, that's a different way of looking at it. But in other words, if a society displaces individuals, whether it's the corporatocracy or, the government or just the society itself, then the society definitely would have would have a moral or ethical responsibility to deal with the displacement or the problems that the society itself has caused. right? You know, if we don't live our lives by some sort of natural law, you know, meaning common sense, fairness, then what, you know, then what are we? What kind of cold, callous people are we? You know. But we're at a point now where we didn't go that route. You know, our cities have become, you know, where we have a breakaway civilizations. So those that live in the Upper East Side and in the skies, you know, in the skyscrapers. It's like Blade Runner, the movie, you know, the original movie. You know, you're down on the streets, you know, you're taking your life in your hand, just walking down the street, or you're living in some sort of futuristic world that's beyond comprehension of the person down on the street. And that's where we are right now, actually. The average person's just is oblivious to it. And they have this piece of technology that's almost like alien tech, in effect. In our world today, if you think about it, this is an older phone. I have a newer one, but I use this. I keep this one because I still use it for music, and it has that black mirror reflection on there that I often talk about. Because in ancient times, you know, there was always warnings about the black mirror, as if, you know, it's witchcraft and, you know, the bedazzled and mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. So I use this. This is a prop. I just use it mainly as a prop. If I go for a walk, though, I've got a nice music collection on here. But, you know, this is almost like alien tech in the world today, because people still live in like the 80s or the 90s, if you think about it. If you look around the average neighborhood, the average street, you know, and you've got people like, you know, what's going to go on, not so much this weekend, but in a couple more weeks, you're going to hear this. Lawnmowers. Guys on lawnmowers mowing their little lawns, little golf courses, right? It's crazy. I can't, you know, I just find things so, instead of listening to this, that's what I prefer to listen to, nature, you know. So it's a beautiful world out there, you know, and like I often say, we're stuck in these cubicles. Now we're not stuck here in the sense that, I mean, I guess many people are, because of lockdown and things of that nature. I personally am free because I purchased a house that was cheap, to put it best. Well, I've got some roof problems. It's you know, I'll figure it out. But I've got a garden. I've got a place where I could go out back, lay on my lounge chair on a sunny day for the better part of the summer, soak up that vitamin D, get a suntan, listen to music. I grow a big garden with plenty of food, 6-7 months worth of food, maybe more. And I could do whatever I want to. And I've got my setup and I've got everything I pretty much need here. In fact, I've got this broadcast studio facility that I've set up, and I operate independently and make no money on whatsoever. I'm not monetized. And I have redundant systems. So if something goes, I can make a workaround. You know, I've got everything I want. I've got my electric guitar over there. So the idea is, you know, you can live well and, you know, like I say, thrive, you know, survive and thrive. Living well is the best revenge. Forget about politics and forget about all those things that are bothering you. But don't fall for hope in the sense of the 4-letter word hope. because there's a lot of people promising all kinds of things out there right now, and those are empty promises. Those promises aren't going to come true. We're moving towards dystopia, not utopia. And you can have happiness for you, your family, your children, and your children's children. Okay? I mean, there are some things coming down the pike that have to do with long-term cycles of the Earth, the solar system, and the sun, that aren't being paid attention to. And I've done shows on that in the past, and I'll talk about those. But generally speaking, in the absence of some sort of solar flare, Carrington event, micronova, an intense grand solar minimum. There is an uptick in volcanic activity now, which is putting ash in the sky, which will ultimately cool the Earth. It's not heating up, and you tie that into a grand solar minimum, and that is a recipe for less crop yields and a cooling planet. So the whole climate change, they switch global warming to climate change because they know that it's cooling, and they try to blame it on that. Well, it's pretty much all you got to do is open your eyes and look around, and you'll see that no, the Earth's magnetic field is weakening. It's migrating. The sun's magnetic field has weakened. We're in these various cycles. There's long-term cycles, there's short-term cycles, and whatever. And we're obviously, in entering into some tumultuous times for human existence on this planet. Which also you would think it would be no time for people to have such irreconcilable differences and infighting. But perhaps that's the motivation behind the corporatocracy and the people at the top who, are obsessed with greed, power and greed, right? They don't care about us. They're not related to us. They don't, they have no interest in this. It's like the slide from a couple days ago, or was it yesterday? I forget. What happens when the farmer leaves the farm? If this is indeed a tax farm, a consumer farm, which it is. What happens when the Bezoses and Gates and whatnot, the farmers just leave the farm and they leave the cattle to fend for themselves? That's dystopia. And it's already happening, right? But it's a big country. It's a beautiful country, all right? It's a beautiful world. And there's a lot of beautiful people out there. And you have your senses and your own creativity and the ability to figure things out. That's what sets us apart from the cow that's abandoned on the farm. The best it can do is break through the fence and try to find a green pasture so it could survive. Okay? But, we can innovate, right? We can figure things out. And that's the stage where we are now. You just can't live on hope, because the type of hope they're feeding us right now through the media and the politicians who are really just marionettes of the corporatocracy who are really pulling the strings. It's false hope. It's misleading hope. It's empty promises. It's lies that fascists, National Socialists, and communists have fed people for well over a century. And every time it always ended in horror. The horror. Like that line from, Apocalypse Now. And so, you have to make a decision to not allow yourself to be fooled, to not have this false hope be placed in your mind and be this part of this rat race, put up with this and think, well, it's going to get better, and supporting and getting into some cult of personality and supporting a political party, an individual, as some kind of messiah. And this idea of politics as pop culture and becoming a news junkie to media people that are just car salesmen, trying to sell prescription drugs, or allowing yourself to be totally in a state of fear, right?
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
People out there I see, they're scared to death. Scared of germs. When did we become scared of germs? Right? There's such thing as being sensible, right? Being cautious, being clean. All right. But most of us grew up in houses, one would think, that we had parents that taught us to wash our hands. We didn't need the government to say, you got to wash your hands. What kind of society is that? That really struck me like over a year ago when the government was saying, wash your hands. There was almost like they were coming out and saying, you mean people don't wash their hands? The idea of like lockdowns. It's like when I was a kid, if you were sick, you said you were sick or you didn't feel well, your mother put a thermometer in your mouth and see if you had a fever, right? If you had a fever or if you were sick or something, physically sick, certain, symptoms had presented themselves, your mother would basically keep you home from school, put you in bed, make you some chicken soup, right? And of course you washed your hands. And if you sneezed, you blew your nose in a handkerchief. And if you coughed, you covered your mouth. Now, since when did we need the government to tell us these things? I mean, did society become that, like, I don't know, dirty, right? I used to tell people all the time when I'd walk down a certain aisle in a supermarket and I'd see all of these air fresheners. And on TV, it used to be just air freshener ads. And I used to say to people, this is way before any of this, plague nonsense. I used to say to people, and people just glare at me because I always notice things, I've had since I was a kid. I used to say, look, I know from being in the advertising business, right? Being in the marketing, understanding marketing, that if a thing is promoted that much, it's a big thing. It's like if there's an entire aisle in a supermarket that's got potato chips in it, a lot of people are eating potato chips. If there's an entire aisle that's got dog and cat food in it, a lot of people own dogs and cats. Okay. That's marketing 101. Okay. Super marketing 101. And I used to see all these air fresheners and stuff. And I used to think, because air fresheners, all they do is mask. I'd say, how dirty must people's houses be if they're spraying Febreze and these various other things all over their houses? Because, see, a clean house doesn't stink. I always use Lysol because I've had pets, and so I would spray certain things down because a Lysol type of thing actually kills, bacteria and viruses. So you can't wash, a sofa, a certain chair or something. You can't, you pull off the thing. So, you have to, the surface of that has to be kept clean and as best as possible if a cat or a dog or something is jumping up on that. That's why people put down, blankets or towels or something where they know a pet's going to jump up on and then wash that towel or blanket. But yeah, when I used to see that, I used to comment to people and people just, it was like their eyes, just glazed over like, oh, whatever he's talking about, who knows, right? But yeah, once they started, and then last year when they started doing the thing about wash your hands, wear a mask because you might, and I was thinking, well, that's kind of messed up. Of course I wash my hands. I wash my hands too many times because, like I say, I have a pet. So, I'm dealing with that all the time, and I garden. So when I come in, I'm washing my hands in the garden. I've got rainwater catchment out there and a little thing, and I'm washing my hands. I'm digging in the dirt. When I come in the house, I'm washing my hands. I thought that was just called basic hygiene. The government's telling you wash your hands. What a bizarre I'm the only one that thought that was bizarre, right? Social distance, but walk from this marker in the supermarket to this marker where the other person was. So there's their airspace and here's your airspace, but now it's time to move right into their airspace, and that's the difference. The illogic of it all, the insanity of all of this, right? And the idea that we have the attention span as a nation, or a former nation, of goldfish, and that memes and headlines, sound bites and sound clip and audio and video clips have become like that viral, and that's what people think, that's how people view reality. And instead, no one understands the game of life, let alone what the rules of the game are. And I don't mean the strict rules in a sense of like terms of service rules. I mean how to play the game. And that's the thing. So in the game of life, if you want to win, you want to limit your exposure to the corporatocracy as much as possible. Remember, there are no governments anymore. It's the corporatocracy. They masquerade as government, okay? But they're not. The government isn't writing the bills, isn't in charge. The corporatocracy's in charge. And that's not to say that there aren't a few, noble characters, that, go through the political process, and, maybe some great orators make some speeches and stuff. But in the end, nothing changes. The corporatocracy has the final say. And so limit your exposure to the corporatocracy. Reduce your costs of living. Don't pay a premium price for nothing. Don't pay a premium price to be in a high crime district. Don't pay a premium price, for real estate, unless you really have enough, and you see that you have enough that it's going to last, beyond the next generation. Because don't count on retirement, right? Because as more and more of these farmers, which I'm talking about the people in the corporatocracy, us being on a tax farm, consumer farm, as more and more of these farmers like Bezos depart their Amazons, so to speak, like Gates departed Microsoft, that power vacuum is going to be filled more and more by nefarious people. Power vacuums are usually filled by, people even worse than the ones that were there before. And so, be aware of that going forward, and don't fall for this false hope. My prediction is that I see tens of millions of unemployed in the fall. I don't see those people ever getting jobs, ever. I don't see people with skills coming up through the ranks. And that's what we need. Infrastructure is not going to be repaired because people just simply don't have the ability, the talent, the skills, the trades to do it. There are certain corporations that have come up, these contractors, to take on these jobs. But there aren't enough of them, to fix the infrastructure in this vast country alone. And besides, it takes carbon-based fuels to dig ditches and open up roadways and relay pipes, manufacture this, that, the other. And they're destroying that right now. So forget about that. That's the hypocrisy of this whole movement. this great reset of capitalism, so to speak. My takeaway from this is that these farmers, and again, I'm not talking about people growing crops, I'm talking about the tax farms, the consumer farms that we live on, that this country became. They're leaving. They're this is the big money grab. They just grabbed a couple trillion. They're going to grab another 3 trillion. And before it's said, they'll probably pull out X amount of other trillion. And at that point, they've got enough. And they're going to be worried about their own future survival and getting away from this dystopia. They know that there's dystopia. Do you actually think that any politician doesn't know the crime rate in Chicago, LA, New York, DC? They know those numbers are available to them. These bureaucrats, that are actually posting these numbers on government sites, they know that. Law enforcement in those cities know that. But they'll come out and they try to give false hope. Hope is a 4-letter word when they step in front of the microphones, and the media covers it, and the politicians, parrot it. And then the people on the street with the protest signs, they've got the slogans, the memes and whatever, and they keep pushing that. It's all an exercise in futility. It's all a great deception. It's all false hope. Hope is a 4-letter word in today's society. So you have to fend for yourself and your family, and you have to be smart. You just have to be smart. Use human ingenuity. Use your human creativity. Use your 5 senses to see the world the way it really is, to understand the game of life and how it's played, and play it right, and play it for the benefit of you and your descendants. And you can live well. And that's the whole idea. And don't hold on to hate and revenge, because living well is the best revenge. Don't go down the path of exercise of futility. Don't waste your time watching news. They're just selling used cars and pharmaceuticals that you really don't need. And if you take them, a certain percentage of people, there's going to be a law firm advertising that if you took that, you got screwed. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to talk about. Hopefully your weekend's going to go well.
Good morning.
Have a good morning. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll put that in the chat. And wherever you're watching this on, whatever medium, because once I end this stream, it'll be posted on Twitter, Facebook, Minds, all these other places. So wherever you're watching this, I hope it's helpful to you in some way, shape, or form. And I'll see you next time here, mostly every day, though I may skip a day or two here or there. But I've been pretty consistent over the past several months, actually. So peace, cheers, have a great life. Talk to you soon.